So, hello everybody. Huh? Oh yeah, thank you. All right, yeah, cool, thank you. So, hi everybody, my name is Pedro. Shows this really cool GIF. Bitcoin just going crazy, yeah. So, I hope you pay attention because everything I say is going to be on our final exam. I'm kidding, no, it's not. So, today I'll be talking about, Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrency in general. I will try to take a different approach. I'll try not to be too technical or anything. I don't know your knowledge on the subject, so I'll try to cover, all areas of interest. So, oops, sorry, wrong button. All right. So this is how this discussion, this talk is going to look like. The first thing I want to tell you is that, there's no blockchain without Bitcoin. It's not only a feature of the blockchain, but you need Bitcoin because it is an economic incentive for the blockchain to work. So this is just the first idea I want to pass to you. I'll be discussing what is money and how our organization is structured because both concepts interact very well and they're very important so that you understand like the blockchain and distributed ledger technology. Then I'll be giving the example of distributed money and talking about, network security, innovation, and using a network analogy, comparing smart networks and dumb networks because they're both very important for the whole concept of blockchain, in my opinion, of course. Finally, I will give you the example of the blockchain and some other types of distributed ledger technology. Okay, because there's different types of these blockchains, which are called distributed ledgers. And they have different properties. So one is not better than the other, they're just different. So let's start with what is money? So this is the first question I want you guys to think about. What is money and what's the purpose of money? So we have this here like this smiley apple, like, sending kisses to everybody. And if I ask you, if you think the price is fair, like if £1 is fair, you maybe think, yeah, it is more or less fine. But if you try to think about it, if I ask you like, what about if it's like 10 NOK or 0.0001 Bitcoin? Do you think the price is fair? Like probably most of you, if you're not familiar with these two currencies, you don't know. So the idea that I want to pass to you is that money is nothing more than just a language. It's a way for us to transmit value, okay, so that other people understand. So there are two main, for me, there are two main properties for money. So it's the property of transmitting value and storing value too. So, so this is why I think money is like a language, because if I tell you, this apple costs 10 NOK and you don't know the currency, so you don't know if the value is, correct or not, you cannot have an opinion on the value. So this is why money is so important, and in currency specifically is so important. Obviously, for this to happen, these conditions need to be met. So agencies trust each other, need to trust the currency, and need to agree on prices, obviously. And for money to be used as a means of storing value, agents need to trust the monetary policies, governments, or these third parties, banks who hold the funds, who hold the money, and that they have liquidity. So that if you go to the bank, you can actually withdraw your money because, if you want to do that, you should be able to do that. Right, yeah, cool. So in terms of how organizations are structured, this is very important because if we think about the blockchain, we'll see that in a few minutes, it's distributed among everybody. So everybody, if you guys want to have the blockchain, you can just download it. It should be 200 something gigabytes, John? Something like that, I think, right? Yeah, okay. So it's not that huge. You can still store it in your laptop. I mean, if you have enough space, of course. So organizations have, usually, are structured in three different ways. So usually you have centralized organizations. So most companies are centralized because, the decision making, it happens at the top, so at the boardroom usually. Then you have decentralized companies. So companies like Wikipedia, for example, they're distributed among the users, although the decision making, it's still centralized at the top. So you can contribute, create content, for example, on Wikipedia, but a bunch of guys will decide if it's good content or not, and if it will get posted or not. So it's not up to you. Cloud companies using cloud infrastructure, I think can be an example. Although the decision making is still centralized at the core, the company might have a completely different decentralized infrastructure. So with cloud, for example. Then you have distributed organizations. These are very, very recent types of organizations. I use the DAO, like the distributed autonomous organizations are the type of these organizations where the agents who participate in the network can contribute, for example, by voting on different subjects, on anything actually. The blockchain is, for example, it's a type of distributed network, so it can be seen as a distributed organization. It does not have an owner. Each user who participates has more or less the same power, and they can vote, they can propose changes, and that's how these types of organizations work. So, right? Right. So we come to distributed money. So because these two concepts, the concept of money as a currency and the concept of how organizations are structured, are important to explain how money can be distributed among the peers, among everybody. So you need distributed ledger technology, okay? So these types of ledgers that are distributed among every person, everybody wants to download the blockchain, and then they need economic incentives. So that's why we have Bitcoin, because without an economic incentive, then you just have a simple distributed ledger, okay? And this technology has existed for, I don't know, like maybe 15 years, something like that. So it's not that new. The new part is adding economic incentives. This was, like in the past, people tried with, for example, DigiCash. It was a currency created in the 90s. And the problem with DigiCash is that it had economic incentives, it was a currency, but it was centralized, so it wasn't distributed among everybody. So it wasn't really, a distributed ledger technology. So for this to work, it needs proof of work, which is basically what people usually call mining Bitcoin. It's just people or nodes, so computers validating transactions, so reaching consensus so that this network can work, so that these transactions are valid. And this is, this is how this network, the blockchain, works, right? Moving forward. So now I'm going to be discussing network security and innovation, because I think these concepts are very important, so that you also understand the distributed technology, the distributed ledger technology, So centralized, infrastructures have single point of entry, so a single database, and usually, they can have redundancy. Redundancy is the ability to copy, information across all servers equally. So usually they don't have redundancy because information is centralized geographically in the same place, and it's expensive infrastructure. So all the infrastructure is owned by the company and it's located on the site. Then you have decentralized companies, like going into the cloud servers that I spoke before. They still have a single point of entry, so they're easy to hack with a single database. They do have redundancy because it's across many different geographical locations, and usually they have cheaper infrastructure. Cloud is cheaper. That's why so many companies use it. Cloud-based servers, So then finally we have the distributed network. So it has no single point of entry. It's basically multiple databases, because every copy of the blockchain, for example, is a database. And then it has redundancy because every copy has the information updated, and it's the same information. And it's really, the costs are very low. You just need to download the blockchain and you can just use it, because it's a copy among everybody. Everybody has kind of the same cost of maintaining it. So, in terms of innovation, it's very important to understand that innovation happens, in networks, innovation happens differently. So, in centralized networks, as it happens with centralized companies, as you can see, innovation happens at the core, right? So, this means that founders or, the boardroom decides what changes will take place. And then they propagate those changes to the users, right? That's how it happens with Facebook or Google or any company, mainly. And then we have, decentralized companies, or a network, where basically innovation happens at the outer, right? So users can make changes and they can propose the changes, and either the changes get accepted or they don't get accepted. But the users are the ones who can propose changes. So distributed ones can work for both centralized or decentralized networks. So you can have a centralized distributed network, which is, for example, let's think of Facebook servers, right? Or the Facebook network. It is in many geographical locations. It's stored in many geographical locations, so it's distributed, but it's still centralized. So innovation still happens at the Facebook core, while decentralized distributed networks, like the blockchain, for example, users can just create a BIP, which is a Bitcoin improvement proposal, and then they can just submit it to the network, and other users will see, I mean, this makes sense or not, and then they will approve it or not. And the change gets implemented or not, depending, on the whole network, because everybody can, can contribute to making a decision. And this is a very important distinction on how innovation happens. Oops, sorry. Down. Yep, my mistake. There we go. So the network analogy. I'm going to explain that usually centralized networks are connected to smart networks, and decentralized ones are usually connected to dumb networks. Obviously, this isn't any rule. It's just like the logic, and I'll explain you why. So smart networks are basically networks that are centralized and which the protocol is smart. So the devices that are connected to that network are dumb. I'm going to try to use a very simple example. Like, do you remember those old movies or TV series where some guy is calling, like maybe in the 40s, some guy is calling some other person, like all across the world, and they need to connect, like to those big offices, like where the young ladies are just changing like channels and asking who do you want to speak to, some guy called John in Pennsylvania, and then they need to connect you to John in Pennsylvania. So the device you were using, like the phone at the time, it was a really, really dumb device, and the network was very smart, right? What happens now, if you look at your phones, it's exactly the opposite. Your phone, it's really, really smart, and it can run many different applications, but the network, so the internet, for example, it's a really dumb network. The only thing that it does, it grabs data packages and transmits those packages across channels. So it's a really, really dumb network. It doesn't take into account what type of data it is. You can send a video, an image, money. It doesn't really matter. It just like transforms that data into bytes and sends it across the network, a channel. And these are dumb networks. So the devices that connect to these networks are the smart devices, not the network itself. And this is how these distributed ledgers work. So blockchain, Ethereum, most of them are really dumb networks, like the internet. While the networks of Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, and any of these companies, are really smart network. Okay, okay, perfect. So, in this example, you can see how the blockchain kind of works. So the blockchain, I'm going to try to make it very simple. So the blockchain works as in with blocks, right? Each block, as you can see, it holds transactions, okay? And each transaction, basically, when it's broadcasted to the network, say, I want to send 1 Bitcoin to Joanna, right? Okay, so she's very lucky. She's getting 1 Bitcoin, nice. So if I want to send 1 Bitcoin to her, what happens is, when I create this transaction, the miners, so the people who validate the transactions, the transaction is encrypted, so when it's broadcasted, and the miners need to verify the content of the transaction. What they do is they compete among themselves, and while they're competing amongst themselves, they're trying to solve this hash, which is basically just, like both the public key of the sender and the receiver, hashed via SHA-256, which is a hashing algorithm. You don't really need to know this, but it's just interesting, I think. So when it gets hashed, these miners try to solve this hash, and when a miner does it and solves the header of the block, then he will get paid in 2 different ways. So when I send the transaction to Joanna, I need to pay a transaction fee. So the miner will get this transaction fee. And also the miner, the first miner who validates the block, so with all the transactions, he will get a Bitcoin reward. I think nowadays it's 12.5 Bitcoins, but it gets like, halved, so the value gets cut to half every 4 years. And so this is how the blockchain works and how transactions are stored on the blockchain. And each transaction is time-stamped, meaning that it's always connected to the previous transaction, to the previous block. So each block is basically connected. That's why it's called a blockchain. And this chain is called a distributed ledger technology because it's distributed among every person. So every peer, every person who wants to download the blockchain, as I said, has the ability to do it, and they will own the network. They'll have the network, and the money, your money, will be safely stored in your computer. There are different ones like Ethereum, Neo, and other cryptocurrencies. I'll speak about them in a second. So we have 2 main types, I think, which are the decentralized distributed ledger and the centralized distributed ledger. Okay, so the blockchain comes here into the decentralized distributed ledger, much as like Ethereum or Neo, as I said, and many other cryptocurrencies. So they're basically, these are the properties, more or less the properties of, you know, distributed ledger technology, decentralized one, so blockchain. So it's peer-to-peer, P2P. So it means that I can communicate directly with, you know, Joanna or anybody. There's no third parties. It's immutable because you cannot change the blockchain. And once a transaction is created and stored on the blockchain, you cannot amend it, you cannot change it, ever. You can create other transactions, but you cannot change the ones that are already there. So it's also very secure because of this property. It's not easy to hack. So you cannot, in order to hack the blockchain, it means that you must have more than 51% of all the hashing power, which is like, it's more or less impossible to happen. And it's censorship resistance because anybody can participate and you cannot impede somebody from, you know, broadcasting a transaction, for example. So it's censorship resistance. It's also distributed, as we know, because it's peer-to-peer. It's permissionless, so you don't need to ask permission. You don't need to sign up. You can just use the blockchain. You can just create a wallet and that's it. It's trustless because you don't need to trust the other party, okay? You can just send money to that party and the consensus will happen on the blockchain. So the mining is the consensus, so you don't need to trust anybody. And finally, it's very transparent. Any of you can go to the blockchain, check like every transaction that happens. If you want to follow Satoshi Nakamoto, so the guy who supposedly created the blockchain, you can follow his address, you can see, you know, when he's spending his own Bitcoins. If you want to do that, you're free to do it. Then, finally, you have centralized distributed ledgers. So they're not better or worse, they're just different. And they serve a different purpose. They're more for businesses, which makes sense because businesses need other properties, like the data to be kept private, for example, and they need it to be permissioned. So if I want to access, maybe I need to create, I need to sign up, I need to identify myself, and that makes sense because, for example, of know your customer regulation or anti-money laundering, if you're creating tokens or if you're trying to securitize something, it makes sense that, you know, regulators and governments know who you are, okay? And finally, it's censorship vulnerable. I think that also makes sense for these types of blockchains, not for blockchains that you want to use as, you know, to send money, but for businesses with the purpose of being used by businesses. Because they can, you know, censor the data that's going into this business. There are some blockchains like Hyperledger, there's some distributed ledgers like Hyperledger, Ripple, which are centralized and they're private blockchains or distributed ledgers. So this means that, again, everybody can participate, but they're different. The way that it works is that they're not as transparent as, you know, decentralized distributed ledgers. That's not a bad thing, it's just the way it works. So this is more or less how the blockchain works. I mean, if you're not very familiar with the subject, this might sound a bit confusing, but the idea that I want to give to you or try to pass to you today is that with this type of technology now, I think we have the opportunity to choose. So money is not a property of any government, and well, currency is not a property of any government or bank. So none of this cryptocurrency, I think, will or came to existence to, you know, to take over like the traditional fiat currency. So the money that we have today. That's not the purpose. The purpose is that people who don't have access to bank accounts, who don't have access to, you know, traditional banking, can use and can store value and can send money. That's the purpose of any cryptocurrency, or that should be the purpose. So the idea that I want to pass is that now we have a choice, and that's already a very good thing. So this technology will only, you know, get bigger, obviously. There's no way to stop it because nobody can block it or regulate it. It's very hard. And so, you know, it's a matter of allowing people to choose. So just if do I still have time? Okay, so just a quick bit about myself. As I said, I'm Pedro. My professional experiences, so that you understand a bit about myself, I think it might be important. So my professional experience is around ERP systems, so Unit 4 and Circle. They use different ERP systems, and my expertise is in implementing enterprise resource planners and supporting them. I also have Bityond. It's the startup that I founded. Well, basically, it's a platform that matches candidate skills to jobs created by employers, right? So instead of, for example, going into LinkedIn and having to look for a job, like Bityond just matches like your skills to jobs that are available, and you can go to the dashboard and that's it. We're also moving the company into distributed networks, so meaning we're creating tokens, giving tokens for like to users per actions that they create. Like I'm going to put my skills here. I got invited for a job. Mostly any action that a user does inside the platform will entitle him to tokens for free, and those tokens will, pay him a revenue. Our company will pay a revenue to token holders, basically. So that's what we want to do, to give an economic incentive to users, so that they get more, more benefits from using the platform. I also write for CryptoCoin News, as Joanna said, and I'm dabbling now with smart contracts for this company called Inbound Labs. I'm creating with them smart contracts for escrows and for crowd sales, because they want to make that connection with their customers. They have something called HubSpot. It's a technology for social marketing, social media, and they want to implement payment channels with different cryptocurrencies and escrow payments for their own customers. So that's what I'm trying to do with them. It's not easy, but at least it's fun. So yeah, this is basically it. I think we'll have time at the end for the discussion, and any questions, anything that you want to ask me, please feel free. Again, I don't think I'm an expert. This is a really, recent, this is like new technology, so sometimes it's hard to understand, hard to grasp, but hopefully, I hope you guys got an idea how it works. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pedro.
All right, there we go. There we go. Oh, do you want me to?
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.